Good evening. I'm Nancy Baker, the Director of Development. It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight to the Athenaeum and introduce our speaker, Colson Whitehead. His book, The Colossus of New York, is a portrait of life in the Big Apple. I just hope for his sake he does not mention the word Yankees in front of this audience. Mr. Whitehead is the author of 3 books. His first novel, The Intuitionist, won the QPB New Voices Award and was an Ernest Hemingway Penn Award finalist. He has received a Whiting Writing Award and in 2002 was given a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Whitehead to our library.
So, howdy. Thanks for coming out. I'm glad things worked out with the Red Sox schedule, or else it'd probably be pretty empty in here. I'm very glad to be here because at home my daughter is 10 days old, and so I haven't slept in like a week. So I got here and I got to the hotel and slept really nicely for 3 hours. It was the best 3 hours of sleep I've had in a little while. So the book is called The Colossus of New York, and I started writing it a couple years ago as a side project. I just finished my last novel, John Henry Days, and I was still, creatively on, even though I had nothing to write about. So I started writing these small vignettes about the city, and I thought that they weren't fiction really, and they were kind of eccentric nonfiction. So I didn't really know what they were, and I figured I would just sort of keep them on the back burner as a side project for a while. And so I wrote about 4 of them up until 9/11. Then after 9/11, I started writing more straightforward nonfiction about the city, and sort of realized that the novel I was working on at that point didn't really seem that interesting, and it seemed like I should probably just work on Colossus full time. So I started devoting all my energy to this book and put the novel aside. The introduction is called City Limits. I'm here because I was born here and thus ruined for anywhere else, but I don't know about you. Maybe you're from here too, and sooner or later it'll come out that we used to live a block away from each other and didn't even know it. Or maybe you moved here a couple years ago for a job. Maybe you came here for school. Maybe you saw the brochure. The city has spent a considerable amount of time and money putting the brochure together, what with all the movies, TV shows, and songs, the whole if you can make it there business. The city also puts a lot of time and effort into making your hometown look really drab and tiny, just in case you were wondering why it's such a drag to go back sometimes. No matter how long you've been here, you're a New Yorker the first time you say, that used to be Muncie's, or that used to be the TikTok lounge. That before the internet cafe plugged itself in, you got your shoes resold in the mom and pop operation that used to be there. You're a New Yorker when what was there before is more real and solid than what is here now. You start building your private New York the first time you lay eyes on it. Maybe you were in the cab leaving the airport when the skyline first roused itself into view. All your worldly possessions were in the trunk, and in your hand you held an address on a piece of paper. Look, there's the Empire State Building. Over there are the Twin Towers. Somewhere in that fantastic, glorious mess was the address on that piece of paper, your first home here. Maybe your parents dragged you for a vacation when you were a kid and towed you up and down the gigantic avenues to shop for Christmas gifts. The only skyscrapers visible from your stroller were the legs of adults. But you got to know the ground pretty well and started to wonder why some sidewalks sparkle at certain angles and others don't. Maybe you came here to visit your old buddy, the one who moved here last summer, and there was some mix-up as to where you were supposed to meet. You stepped out of Penn Station into the dizzying hustle of 8th Avenue and fainted. Freeze it there. That instant is your first brick in this city. I started building my New York on the Uptown 1 train. My first city memory is of looking out the subway window as the train erupted from the tunnel on the way to 125th Street and palsied up to the elevated tracks. It's the early 70s, so everything is filthy, which means everything is still filthy, because that's my city and I'm sticking to it. I still call it the Pan Am building, not out of affectation, because that's what it is. For the new transplant from Des Moines, who's starting her first week of work at a Park Avenue South insurance firm, that titan squatting over Grand Central is the MetLife building, and for her it always will be. She's wrong, of course. When I look up there, I can clearly see the gigantic letters spelling out Pan Am, don't I? And of course I am wrong, in the eyes of the old-timers who maintain the myth that there was a time before Pan Am. History books and public television documentaries are always trying to tell you all sorts of facts about New York. That Canal Street used to be a canal. That Bryant Park used to be a reservoir. It's all hokum. I've been to Canal Street, and the only time I ever saw a river flow through it was during the last water main explosion. Never listen to what people tell you about old New York, because if you didn't witness it, it's not part of your New York, and might as well be Jersey. Except for that bit about the Dutch buying Manhattan for $24. There are and always will be braggarts who got in at the right time. There are 8 million stories. There are 8 million naked cities in this naked city. They dispute and disagree. The New York City you live in is not my New York City. How could it be? This place multiplies when you're not looking. We move over here, we move over there. Over a lifetime, it adds up to a lot of neighborhoods, the motley construction material of your jerry-built metropolis. Your favorite newsstands, restaurants, movie theaters, subway stations, and barber shops are replaced by your next neighborhood's favorites. It gets to be quite a sum. Before you know it, you have your own personal skyline. Go back to your old haunts and your old neighborhoods, and what do you find? They remain and have disappeared. The greasy spoon, the deli, the dry cleaner you scattered out when you first arrived and tried to make those new streets yours, they are gone. But look past the windows of the travel agency that replaced your pizza parlor. Beyond the desks and computers and promo posters for tropical adventures, you can still see Neapolitan slices cooling, the pizza cutter lying next to half a pie, the map of Sicily on the wall. It's all still there, I assure you. The man who just paid for his trip to Jamaica sees none of that, sees his romantic getaway, his family vacation, what this little shop on this little street has granted him. The disappeared pizza parlor is still here because you are still here. And when the beauty parlor replaces the travel agency, the gentleman will still have his vacation, and that lady will have her manicure. You swallow hard when you discover that the old coffee shop is now a chain pharmacy, that the place where you first kissed so-and-so is now a discount electronics retailer, that where you bought this very jacket is now rubble behind a blue plywood fence. Damage has been done to your city. You say, it happened overnight, but of course it didn't. Your pizza parlor, his shoe shine stand, her hat store, when they were here, we neglected them. For all you know, the place closed down moments after the last time you walked out the door. 10 months ago, 6 years, 15 years, you can't remember, can you? And there have been 5 stores in that spot before the travel agency. 5 different neighborhoods coming and going between then and now, other peoples, other cities, or 15, 25, 100 neighborhoods. Thousands of people pass that storefront every day, everyone haunting the streets of his or her own New York. Not one of them seeing the same thing. We can never make proper goodbyes. It was your last ride in a checker cab, and you had no warning. It was the last time you're going to have Lake Tung-Ting shrimp in that kind of shady Chinese restaurant, and you had no idea. If you'd known, perhaps you would have stepped behind the counter and shaken everybody's hand, pulled out the camera and issued posing instructions. But you had no idea. There were unheralded tipping points. A certain number of times we will unlock the front door of an apartment. At some point, you were closer to the last time than you were to the first time, and you didn't even know it. You didn't know that each time you passed the threshold, you were saying goodbye. I never got a chance to say goodbye to some of my old buildings. Some I lived in, others were a part of a skyline I thought would always be there. And they never got a chance to say goodbye to me. I think they would have liked to. I refuse to believe in their indifference. You say you know these streets pretty well. The city knows you better than any living person because it's seen you when you are alone. It saw you steeling yourself for the job interview, slowly walking home after the late date, tripping over non-existent impediments in the sidewalk. It saw you wince when the single frigid drop fell from the air conditioner 12 stories up and zapped you. It saw the bewilderment on your face as you stepped out of the stolen matinee, incredulous that there was still daylight after such a long movie. It saw you half running up the street after you got the keys to your first apartment. The city saw all that, remembers too. Consider what all your old apartments would say if they got together to swap stories. They could piece together the starts and finishes of your relationships, complain about your wardrobe and musical tastes, gossip about who you are after midnight. Apartment 7J says, "So that's what happened to Lucy. I knew it would never work out." You picked up yoga, you put down yoga, you tried various cures. You tried on selves and got rid of them. And this makes your old rooms wistful. Why must things change? Apartment 3R goes, "Saxophone, you say. I knew him when he played guitar." Cherish your old apartments and pause for a moment when you pass them. Pay tribute, for they're the caretakers of your reinventions. Our streets are calendars containing who we were and who we will be next. We see ourselves in the city every day when we walk down the sidewalk and catch our reflections in store windows, seek ourselves in the city each time we reminisce about what was there 15, 10, 40 years ago, because all our old places are proof that we were here. One day the city we built will be gone, and when it goes, we go too. When the buildings fall, we topple too. Maybe we become New Yorkers the day we realize that New York will go on without us. To put off the inevitable, we try to fix the city in place, remember it as it was, doing to the city what we would never allow to be done to ourselves. The kid on the Uptown No. 1 train, the new arrival stepping out of Grand Central, the jerk at the intersection who doesn't know east from west. Those people don't exist anymore, ceased to be a couple of apartments ago, and we wouldn't have it any other way. New York City doesn't hold our former selves against us. Perhaps we can extend the same courtesy. Our old buildings stand because we saw them, moved in and out of their long shadows, were lucky enough to know them for a time. They're a part of the city we carry around. It's hard to imagine that something will take their place, but at this very moment, the people with the right credentials are considering how to fill the craters. The cement trucks will roll up and spin their bellies, the jackhammers will rattle, and after a while the postcards of the new skyline will be available for purchase. Naturally, we'll cast a wary eye toward these new kids on the block. But let's be patient and not judge too quickly. We were new here too once. So that was City Limits. So I guess when I started writing these impressionistic essays about the city, I realized that I wasn't actually, even though they were taking off from key New York places like Times Square, Brooklyn Bridge, they ended up sort of straying from the subject, so that the Port Authority chapter, which started out talking about the great sort of entrance to New York City, the Port Authority bus station, mostly took place in the bus ride to the city. It was really about what we feel when we come to a new place for a new time, so that the chapter is about making a new home, whether that new home is Chicago or Boston or New York City. And so the essays became sort of jumping off points to talk about how we live in cities and our ideas of home. I think in that first section I just read, City Limits, that sort of way we feel about the city is applicable to any sort of big city or even small towns. I think we have affection for our sort of key places, and we mark their progress. And when suddenly a new sign goes up in the window saying that our favorite diner is going to be a Nike shoe store, we sort of feel like sort of personally wounded. So the book eventually started becoming a way to talk about cities, and not so much about New York, and more about how people behave during rush hour or on a rainy day. I'm going to read a longer chapter called Downtown, and it's really about going out at night in big cities and small cities. And I don't really get out that often anymore, so I feel nostalgic when I read this piece. So indulge me, I guess. Jumping rope, punching the air, and shadow boxing especially. The prize fighters warm up for the big bout. So much on the line. The mirror in the corner counsels, keep your fists up and your head down. Then the bell rings, and it's out of apartments, out of workplace personas, into streets, into nighttime guises. Twilight is a mask factory. Happy hour descends, this low fog. It's ladies' night or discounted Jell-O shots or 2 for 1. The bartender supervises distribution of watered-down stash, picks up bits of conversation. Other people empty her drop by drop. Solitary drinkers share cautionary tales through posture. He collects coasters from all over the world. This one he's got in spades. This is the beer to have when you're having more than one. Sitting at the bar, waiting to be picked up like in the movies, or merely saved. Eyes slide from stool to stool, fingers running across rows of books. Browse this library shelf, linger over spines even as you are browsed in turn. Examined, checked out. Certainly there are a few volumes yet unread. Pull the next personality out of your back pocket. Maybe this one will work. He overhears his words coming out of someone else's mouth and wishes his complaints were not so common. Pace yourself. Things are just getting started. They tumble down museum steps after taking in this season's big exhibit. She feels so much more comfortable parroting critics with a bona fide ticket stub in her pocket. When they went into the art house movie, it was light out, reckoning the surcharges on matinees. What do you feel like doing? I don't know. Everybody else knows where the hot new restaurants are. They don't get out as much as they used to, haunted by the beady little eyes of the babysitter. Depending on what's going on in the rest of the world, for whole minutes he's the worst waiter in the whole world. Protocols for dealing with complainers are taped up by the kitchen door. Think saliva. Seething over appetizers, they save it up for home so they won't fight in the restaurant. It's nice to have an activity or hobby you can share with your spouse. These two have decided on spite, and it's brought them closer together. Unlikely as it is, for once they're the well-adjusted couple at the table for 4. Eyes roll when he orders off the menu. That looks good. They eat here once a month. But something about this meal makes them realize these things haven't worked out for a while now, and they'll never return. Countdown to symptoms of food poisoning. Would you like dessert? We have a wide assortment of bitters. This must be the place. It's not. This particular street address does not exist. In another city perhaps, but not this one, or maybe in the future, but not now. Then defectors open the door, and it begins. He swears he's been here before. Doesn't know a single soul. Lost in the cocktail party. Who to talk to, anyone, drain the melted ice again, go to the bar, hit the bathroom. By the time you return, the party will have aligned in your favor. No such luck. Planting this rumor is harder than it first looked. Gardeners advise patience. Things take root or don't. Given the choice between two parties, that guy over there will always make the wrong decision. Case in point, no prying a certain type from the hors d'oeuvre table. For the last half hour, she's been trying to gain converts to grudges, but no such luck. What does she see in him? He's so transparent, old enough to be his daughter. For half a minute, they inhabit the dream city that lured them from their hometowns, but then discover nothing solid beneath their feet, and down they go. Quicksand occurs most frequently in movies, then comes parties. Mark my words, when they finally teach coffee table books to walk and talk, the market will fall out of the trophy wife and boy toy business. Hipsters seek refuge in church, Our Lady of Perpetual Subculture. There's some discussion as to whether or not they are still cool, but then they are calmed by the obscure location and the arrival of their kind. Keep the address to yourself. Let the rabble find it for themselves. Wow, this crappy performance art is really making me feel not so bad about my various emotional issues. He has to duck out early to get back to his bad art. 3 cheers for your rich interior life. May it serve you well come rent day. Beer before liquor, never sicker. This one's on me. Somehow he ends up buying every round. Hour by hour the customers change, grow humps, horns, scales. The little noises they make. Her boyfriend's out of town, his college roommate's in town, my friend's band's playing downtown. He made too many plans with too many people, and things will not turn out okay. She's a little worried because at midnight the new legislation goes into effect, and the draconian save the drama for your mama laws are really going to cramp her style. Hit the town, it hits back. The newspaper write-up contains bad directions to the hot new spot. Suddenly they're on empty streets in unreckoned neighborhoods and must go deeper into darkness before safety. Corners and alleys at a metropolitan fable, bricked-up doorways, newspapers stunt-doubling for tumbleweeds. Streetlights, gallow, footsteps of roving thugs. They ask, can you hear me? They ask, is that you beside me, or is this the end of it all? Then music enters deep tissues. They see the lights and the mob, but that was real fear, and what if word gets out that you're still capable of fear after all these years? Count on one thing, count on this. Night keeps its mouth shut. Nightclub doors are shut. This is Rent-A-Bouncer's most popular model. They never blink. New satanic advances make it possible for them to actually appraise the souls of aspiring clubgoers. Seen a certain way, the velvet rope kind of smiles. A delegation of corpses staggers by on structurally unsound heels. She read an article where it said formaldehyde is really in this year. Simple economics. If they only admit the beautiful people, who will pay the cover charge? And they said his shirt was loud, pantomime desires. One by one the gang goes off on adventures. On waking next afternoon they'll compare notes, design flaws of the rich and famous. Knock politely on the bathroom door. People are up to no good in there. It's very suspicious. Watch out. It's the nightly running of the anorexic assistants. They squeeze by easily. Everybody's looking so good. Everybody's so well put together. I just want to say, keep up the good work, troops. The DJ has scrutinized evolution and knows the back door into reptilian brainstem. The beat cries mutiny, recruits limbs and hips, strips this vessel of volition. Apparently this song is very popular. Lewd dances trigger responses. Still the wallflower after all these years. To be able to just dance up to somebody and start doing that, whatever that's called. Akimbo things banish drinks to the floor. Elbows, heels, hands, and heads. Beware the lumbering man-child at your left. They tend to wave their arms when they dance. She looks down at her hips. Not half bad. It's a full moon. Lunar effects are readily observable in emergency rooms and ATM vestibules. People need more money. If they could only withdraw common sense. Friends put friends up to ill-advised behavior. Talking to that woman, putting up dukes, stealing furnishings. She's been following him for 20 blocks and he still hasn't noticed. The streets at this hour are low comedy. They chant, girl fight, girl fight. Why does the crazy person always pick on him? Is it that obvious? Recognize them from high school and flee. Past the jazz joint jazz joint humid from solos, past the local bar with the earnest singer-songwriter. After this gig, she'll have enough for a new rhyming dictionary, top of the line, the one with the word that rhymes with orange. Bumping into the shop clerk after hours in this new context. Worlds collide, there's a cop. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but now he's going to have to explain how he got this scar, an average of 3.5 times a week for the rest of his life. If the victims all got together, they could trace back their misfortunes to this one cursed payphone. It's the only one for miles in working condition, and everything people say on it turns out bad. Urgent telegram from the Ministry of Unhappy Thoughts. Been thinking, stop. No good will come from this, stop. Like the moon, you're only good and visible a few days a month. Exerting influence, pulling up whitecaps. The rest of the time falling away, cut up into parts, and nobody knows where you are. It's so cold. Just a few more blocks, dear. Maintain the illusion tonight will be different. Wheel in the extra generators if you have to. Plenty of seats in their predictable cafes. No waiting. What do you have? The menu never changes. Things are pretty much status quo with the sexual tension, friend. Make a note to ramp up machinations for next week. Boys' night out collides with girls' night out over some confusion as to who has the right of way. Perhaps you recognize him from such bungled seductions as Your Front Stoop and Darkened Hallway at the Christmas Party. She has convinced herself she has no secret plan for this encounter, waiting for the opening and conversation to reveal the true purpose of this meeting. When it comes to romance, he never met a lesson he didn't learn. No, she's never cheated on him. But if you put it that way, it almost sounds like a dare. 2 drinks past the point of being able to suffer chance encounters with vague acquaintances, relatives, people from work. They will report back. One by one, we are becoming unrecognizable. But wait, there's more. Under the big top, in tiny rooms of polite talk, in cattle car taverns and cavernous clubs, citizens line up for the same amusements, the rigged games and the broken rides. I like your fez. Still plenty of time to suck up, air grievances, expose character flaws. The most important person in the room possesses a gravitational field, and cocktail napkins waft toward him. Aim for the soft underbelly. That's their vulnerable point. Anybody got a mint? She must be sleeping on the job because everyone's acting as if they see her for who she truly is. Folks get by on their favorite props, old jokes, some cleavage. Anecdote 7, test run anecdote 7, twice as efficient as anecdote 6 and only half as long. They applaud his wit. Not a third of the way to the punchline, it's clear that the joke is going to bomb. From their reaction, that word is no longer used in polite company. Did you know that smiling politely burns up the same amount of calories as speaking your mind? He confesses his love when the room momentarily clears. Everybody returns as she's about to make her response. They used to be married and now divvy up the room like they once divvied up friends. Dare you to cross this line. Some rub wedding rings with thumbs when that creature comes into view. He studies her posture as she talks to that dashing stranger. Something is setting off alarms. Smoke, no doubt. $10 says they go home together. Suddenly realizing you're talking awfully close. Everybody else seems to have left, and what does that mean? Somebody stole your coat. This is exactly the sort of behavior her therapist warned her against. He dresses like his friends so they won't suspect he's unlike them. To preempt rejection, she dresses to exaggerate her difference, when the true enemy is not the world's disdain, but its indifference. He is definitely the next item in a dreary procession and cannot be seen for all those previous disappointments. Over-explain your latest career decision. How can he even show his face around town after the latest setbacks? People spare a minute or two relishing other people's setbacks before their own inadequacies distract them again. This is his umpteenth pint, but he has a hollow leg or some sort of emptiness in himself, and he doesn't feel the least bit tipsy. What they take for her air of mystery is merely a side effect of her medication. Something's going on under the table. Gargoyles have clambered down from their rooftop perches to replace his friends. But he's not sure if he should do anything because they're quite funny, actually, and much more supportive than his real friends. Impress them with your selections, jukebox guru. Press the right buttons and she'll be brainwashed into the cult of you. Soapbox, the better word, for these pamphlets contain his philosophies. Have your songs come on yet? All over town, passive-aggressive jukeboxes, delay departures. Every selection pulls them this way and that, sad and out to sea unless they outwit the undertow of minor chords. Tonight the song you always despised strides from the jukebox full-bodied, and you hear the lyrics for the first time, understand the lyrics for the first time after all these years. This new you with an older soul, now it's your favorite. Some of them have already decided where this night is going. None of them have commented on her engagement ring, so she knocks everybody's drinks over, accidentally on purpose. He spills his guts. It was the last sip that sent him over the edge, but she has her hands full with her own loneliness. She's not about to take on his. Reach inside to muzzle the broken part of you that is now talking. Last call. This is good night for anyone with a lick of sense. Anyone with a lick of sense is calling it a night. One more for the road. He pretends he needs convincing. The binge is going swimmingly. Thanks for asking. The adjectives that describe the bathroom are so scarce as to be an endangered species. Protected from poaching by government regulations, so use your imagination. So much for the breakfast date. With every passing hour, she scratched off another appointment, and now her whole day is free. Rumor has it they're open after hours. Something in the way they say, "See you soon," crystallizes that their friendship changed months before, and in fact they will not see each other for a long time. It's been arranged. Leave separately and meet up in 10 minutes. No one will notice. Everybody knows. Exchange numbers. The little noises they make. We should hang out sometime. We should get together. We should do a lot of things we'll never do. Drunken ladies are crammed into taxi cabs by quick-witted friends, out of reach of predators. He won't wake up. This is the last hand. Bet it all on this. Few of them profess to be actors, and yet they are naturals for these curbside improvs. The whole clumsy erotic theater of, which way you going? Do you want to share a cab? They don't want to go home. Someone is waiting for them, or no one. They head home, remembering too late that he's insufferable on long cab rides, now showing the return of the native in his cups as he slips into his avenues. Buckle up for safety. Ride with him, and sooner or later you'll hear him say it. I used to live there. His finger jabs as if to poke a hole into night. I used to live there. On Broadway and Fulton and Riverside and Houston, he's goddamned irritating. Can't keep his mouth shut. I used to live there. In crowded movie theaters, when it turns out the location scout knows where to get the best 50-cent hot dog, on long walks, while flipping through random books of photography, while flying overhead on jet planes. I used to live there. When they least expect it, he'll say it. Apropos of nothing, he'll say it. Because if he hasn't lived there, he will someday. There are always other apartments waiting for him. There's always more city. Held fast by red lights in key spots. At the site of yesterday's accident, there are shreds of metal and tiny cubes of glass. Each time the light changes, tires spread it far and wide until it's an invisible layer of sorrow across the city. He used to live there on a corner. Who lives in those apartments now? Who's using his old phone numbers? Quick math says there's no way he could afford the apartment he grew up in, and now he's in exile in his own city. What's there to say as he passes it and all the others? How to communicate this feeling to friends or people who might care. Immensity of the debt, poverty of citizens. What's there to say as you pass the humble places that helped you out in ways you cannot understand, that were there for you on certain nights when you had neither friends nor cab drivers, only keys. The light changes, almost home. After all that worry and the rough seas, night runs aground. Some of them made it to shore after all. He knows a place where they can grab breakfast. Look at the time, look at me, look at them holding hands. They talked all night. While everyone else went mad, they found each other. Not made for each other, but maybe made out of each other. The same substance, the way the city is one substance, every inch of it from one end to the other. Solid, immutable, unbreakable. Everybody out, last stop. Look at the sky, toward the east side. There's sunlight in its trademarked colors. Sunlight charging broken glass. Sunlight over tenements at last. And we're safe. And I think that's all I'm going to read. And I'll take some questions, if there are any questions. If you want any stock tips or advice, I'm also the person to come to. I'm sure, like me, you started buying oil early part of the year. It's approaching 60. We're making good. Hi. I'm pretty vulgar, so I actually really like it. I really like. It's just. On certain nights like this, where it's really foggy, it's a really beautiful place. The light just sort of lights up all the fog. And there's actually a secret place on Union Square. Broadway comes up from downtown Union Square and starts heading up at an angle towards Times Square. And if you stand in one spot on a rainy day, you can see the light reflecting, bouncing off like buildings, sort of in the canyon of Broadway, and it sort of lights up. And it looks like there's like a huge like heaven somewhere like around the corner. It's really nice. So you can't. Obviously, drugs and prostitutes are hard to come by. That affects some part of the population. Not me so much. It's safer, and I sort of like these sort of really tumultuous changes in the city. I think the new is often ugly, but then if you hang around, it becomes kind of beautiful, and it happens in a lot of places in the city. Even some of our friends are like that too. Hi. Well, the fun thing about this book, I was actually able to, not so much in the chapter I just read, but in the rush hour chapter, people sort of stream into Grand Central, and that's what sort of ends the chapter. I was able to take, key spots that are part of my own personal mythology and sort of, give a little tribute to them. The places in the city I don't like, so I was able to sort of disgrace them. So there are a lot of different places. Mostly, I would say Broadway is not a building, but I really like walking on Broadway. I've lived. I come from a family of like renters and movers, and we had a lot of kids. And if we had like 4 kids, we got a bigger place. If a kid went to college, we got a smaller place. So we moved to a lot of different places around the city. But Broadway is always sort of like the axis, and so there's like a downtown Broadway love and an uptown Broadway love. So the chapter about Broadway in the book is about a guy who on the first day of spring sort of goes out and sort of tests himself against the city and sees what's gone since last summer. And I definitely do that. I don't really exercise that much. My only exercise is walking. So walking down Broadway is sort of where I get my sort of city fix in. Hi. I hadn't really read him till after, and now I really like him. When I started writing the book, and I had like 3 or 4 of the essays. I got I think it's Philip Lopate. He has a book, a literary New York anthology, and that collects New York writing from the 1700s on. And basically, every writer who lives in New York writes a little essay about Broadway and about downtown and the Brooklyn Bridge. And so I got kind of depressed, so I realized actually New York writers write about New York. And I sort of realized that I have to do it my own way. And so I stopped reading New York stuff for a while, for like 2 or 3 years. And I didn't get the Joseph Mitchell book and really sit down with it until afterwards. And I really love it. He's a great eye. And he really captures this kind of mid-century New York that is, I'm not really sure how it became part of my mythology, but these colorful characters and the sort of kind of buildings they were making back then. And I never really sort of experienced it or lived through it, but it's sort of in the back of my head as this kind of really beautiful mythological New York. So he's definitely a great sort of person to read. Howdy.
You mentioned liking Broadway, walking there. Are there a couple of other places you could describe in New York that you really like that are maybe a little more offbeat or, I don't know, just sort of spirit place?
Well, it's funny because the first place that jumps into my mind is Crosby and Prince. It's just like a random intersection, but Crosby is a really narrow street. It's like 6 blocks long. It's very industrial, but it's very quiet, and it's sort of like I was going back to the previous question, stepping back into an earlier kind of New York. There's nothing new on it. I mean, there are a few boutiques there, but it's just really quiet and strange. Allen, below Delancey, there's a weird, like a power plant, and then like really short buildings where no one seems to live. And there's always like a guy with a cart selling something. I'm kind of afraid to cross the street to see what he's selling, but it's like a weird. There are places like where it seems like the sound sort of drops out, and you're not in New York anymore. You're just in a kind of weird place that's off to the side, and it happens on sort of random street corners where it happens a lot of times during blizzards. If you're the first person out in the street and there are no tracks in the road, and I'm going to say you, even though it's me, then you're like, I'm the mayor of this town. Where you sort of feel like you have a certain kind of ownership over the city, or the city's taking care of you and sort of granting you this sort of moment of grace before other people sort of walk through the snow. So my favorite New York places are really kind of random, and I think if in that first essay I was talking about not actual places that I love, but I was talking about old buildings and old apartment buildings and old places I used to live in, neighborhoods, and so those places are really alive for me, and it's not really something you can translate. I mean, I can't say if you go to Flatbush, Fulton, and South Oxford, you're going to have a great time. But I feel a real sense of peace when I go there because it's part of my sort of life and banal life. Sorry. Hello. I try. My wife and I moved to San Francisco in '96 just to see if we could live somewhere else. And after 6 weeks, I was like, I wanted to come home. She unfortunately became very outdoorsy and was mountain biking 100 miles a day and all that stuff. But I was writing, so we lived next to an overpass, and outside my window was an overpass. It was kind of industrial. It was kind of and I could have been anywhere. So we came back after a year and a half, and I realized that I had to come back. It was during that El Nino year in '96 when it rained every day. So 6 months it rained, and the whole town was depressed. And one day I went out to the Embarcadero Center, this downtown place of tall buildings. It's very sort of metropolitan. And saw a matinee of a very depressing English movie called The Butcher Boy. It's a horrible, depressing movie. So I was depressed from the weather, I was depressed in the movie. It came out at 5 o'clock. I suddenly felt energized. I'm like, why do I feel so good? And I realized it was rush hour, and everybody was rushing into the subway. It was really angry. It was jostling. And I missed that energy. Even though I hate being out in rush hour in New York, there's something about sort of experiencing it every once in a while that is invigorating. And so I realized even though it's hard to make a case for rush hour being a pleasant experience, I did get something out of it that one time. I was reminded. And we came back, and we were back in New York happily and whatnot.
What do you think is the most profound or the most pronounced effect of the city since 9/11?
Probably the huge rippling psychic depression like that took over the whole city, and has decreased year by year. I mean, each year on the anniversary, people are less freaked out and less anxious and less afraid to leave their house, less weepy. This year, I had a family reunion in New Jersey, and it sort of forgotten it was September 11th until we got on the highway and realized that no one was driving because no one wanted to go into a tunnel on September 11th because it might get bombed or something. So there's a huge crater, and definitely when you go into Manhattan from Brooklyn, it's a reflex. You can't help it. You look for the Twin Towers, and the geography of downtown is such that you can't actually tell where they're supposed to be. So there's sort of like a minute where you're like, were they there? And you can't really tell. There's like just sort of ghost feeling of where they're supposed to be. So, I mean, it was a very hard time. It gets easier day by day. Sometimes some days you think about it a lot, some days you don't think about it at all, and then you'll realize you haven't thought about it for 2 days, and you think about it a lot. So it's sad and distressing, and over time it gets easier because you can't live there without dealing with it in some way. So you have to come to grips with it. And when I put the novel I was working on down to work on this, I realized that I had to figure out how to live in this city, in my hometown, after this huge event. And I wasn't going to be able to do anything else until I did write this book and sort of get these, really just sort of figure out what the city meant to me now. And in the chapters I wrote after 9/11, there's definitely a more melancholy edge. I mean, I don't address the attacks directly, but some at different points they get a little darker than they would have probably before, and that's because it's the way I feel about the city. It's not. It's my beautiful hometown, but it's also a lot more fragile than I used to consider it. So I'll take one more question, and then, sir.
Yes, it's a real treat to hear a writer read. We don't get that chance very often, but what comes across to me is a very strong sense of rhythm. And I first came across that myself reading Robert Penn Warren, and I think it was the King James Bible. And I was just curious, and also another writer that really comes across strongly like that would be Melville. I'm curious if in your childhood and adolescence there was any particular literature or music that you really liked that would give you some feeling. It's a wonderful rhythm. I'm just wondering where it comes from.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the last thing I read particularly is it's a very non-traditional essay. I make up things, I speculate. So you can't really, it's sort of false to call it straight nonfiction because I was out making it up. And one of the problems I had when I started writing these essays was, how do I, a fiction writer guy, make a sort of coherent story without a character or a story? And immediately started just hit upon that rhythm that's in these pieces of sort of long and short sentences, sort of some rhyme, not too much rhyme, a very sort of detailed sentence juxtaposed with maybe more abstract thought. And so for me, there's movement through the essays that comes from ideas and wordplay, and not from my usual, like what I sort of train myself to do, which have a main character and a story and whatnot. The rhythm is it's a rhythm that came very naturally, and once I sort of hit upon it, it made a lot of the essays easier to write because I had this sort of baseline to work with. I love Melville. I haven't really seen Melville in these pieces. The first person to have a sort of, for me, a kind of controlled sort of stream of consciousness, kind of impressionistic prose style was Dos Passos. And in his USA trilogy, in his camera eye sections, he has these kind of, for me, which are kind of jazzy, very intense point of view sections, which I was thinking of when I first started writing these. For some reason, Ginsberg Howl, or maybe it's more obvious, but Ginsberg's Howl sort of was resonating with me when I was writing it. In terms of music, I listen to mostly modern music, like really atonal, electronic stuff. So I'm not sure how that creeps in. But I found when I first started reading, I was really horrible because writing's one thing, and then you have to go out and your book comes out, and you have to bring it out to people. So over time, I've learned to speak a little more slowly and enunciate, and not mumble as much. So I've become a better reader over time, and I think these essays are easier for me to read because the rhythm is just very close to how my mind sort of works in a weird kind of way. I know that sounds weird, I guess, but that's it, I guess. So thanks a lot.